morning, 8th grade mathematicians, and welcome to virtual math class. Today we're going to be solving equations with rational coefficients. Okay, so our objective for today is that students will be able to identify what a coefficient is and solve equations with rational coefficients. And we'll learn what all of that means in just a minute. So, what is a coefficient? A coefficient is simply the number that is with the variable. And remember that the variable is simply the letter. So, if I have the equation 5x plus 2 equals 10, well, a coefficient is simply the number that's with our variable. Our variable is x, so what number is with x? 5. So here our coefficient would be 5. If I have like 1/2 x equals 18, well, what number is with my variable? 1/2. So my coefficient is 1/2. So your variable is the letter that represents the unknown, and then your coefficient is the number that is with the variable. So another thing we need to know is the reciprocal, because that's how we're going to solve these. So what is the reciprocal? You should remember, but just in case, a reciprocal is the multiplicative inverse of a number. So remember, we already talked about inverse, and that means opposite. So the number and the reciprocal multiply together to equal 1. And this often means flipping a fraction. So if I have, I'll use 1/2 again. So if I have 1/2, and it says that it often means flipping a fraction. Well, if I flip 1/2, that would become 2/1, right? And then if I multiply those together, because it says that they need to multiply together to equal 1. So if I multiply those together, whenever I multiply fractions, I multiply straight across. So 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 1 is 2, and 2 divided by 2 equals 1. So it checks out. So if I have 3/4, what would the multiplicative inverse be? Or what would the reciprocal be? I would just flip it, 4/3. What about 5/8? What would my reciprocal be? It would be 8/5. Good job. So you just, in terms of a fraction, you just flip it. If you had a whole number, well, we know a whole number that we can just put it over 1. So the multiplicative inverse of 2, I put it over 1, and then I flip it, and it becomes 1/2. Pretty easy, right? Okay, so now to solve the equations with our rational coefficient. So our coefficient here is our number that's with x. So it's 3/4. So if I solve this, I need to solve it. So when I have a fraction that is being multiplied by a number, in order to solve these, I'm going to multiply both sides by the reciprocal. And the reciprocal of a fraction we already talked about. That's just, we flip it. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 4/3. So again, 4 times 3, well, that would be 12. And 3 times 4, well, that would be 12. So that just equals 1, right? So really, I don't even need that. And all I can do is I can put x equals, and then I do the same thing over here. When I multiply fractions, I can put that over 1. 12 times 4 is 48. 1 times 3 is 3. And so what is 48 divided by 3? That equals 16. So I would have x equals 16. Good job. So if you're thinking, couldn't I just divide? Okay, let's do that. If I have 3/4 x equals 12, and I want to divide, because I know that I'm multiplying 3/4 times x because it's a number and a letter together, a number and a variable. So if I divide both sides by 3/4, okay, I get that x equals, this would be 12 divided by 3/4. And do you know what happens whenever you divide by a fraction? Do you remember? You keep your first number. You change your division to multiplication. And then you flip your fraction. You multiply by the reciprocal. So either way, you still get 12 times 4/3, even if you do the dividing. So either way, we get that x equals 16. So it's a lot easier to just multiply that by the reciprocal to begin with. And our next example, so this one is a 2-step because I have my fraction here, with my variable, and then I have the something else along with it. So this 1/2 and x is together. So I'm going to start by getting rid of my plus 5. And how do I do that? I'm going to subtract 5 on both sides. So once I do that, a plus 5 and a minus 5, well, that cancels out. So I'm just left with 1/2 x equals, what is 11 minus 5? That equals 6. So now I have my fraction 1/2 x equals 6. So now all I have to do is I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. And 1/2, if I flip it, that becomes 2/1. So I'm essentially just multiplying by 2. So 2/1 times 1/2, again, I would have 2 times 1 and 1 times 2. And so that basically cancels each other out. So I'm just left with x equals 6 times 2 is 12. And then I can put that over 1. And 1 times 1 is 1. So really, all I'm doing is 6 times 2. And that equals 12. Now, if we want to check ourselves, because we always check ourselves, I would have 1/2 times 12 plus 5, and that needs to equal 11. So half of 12, well, half of 12 is 6. So I have 6 plus 5 equals 11. And does 6 plus 5 equal 11? Yes, it does. Ooh, same problem, but now we have a negative. So I have negative 5/7x equals 15. So it's literally the exact same thing. But what needs to happen? If I have a negative and it needs to equal 1. So if I already have a negative, do I need to multiply by the positive or the negative reciprocal? I need to multiply by the negative reciprocal because a negative times a negative is going to equal a positive. And that's the only way that I can get a positive 1. So I multiply by negative. What's the reciprocal of 5/7? 7/5. So I multiply both sides by negative 7/5. And so over here, that becomes 1. That becomes a giant 1. So I'm left with x equals, and now I have 15/1 times negative 7/5. So I do 15 times 7, or negative 7, and I would get negative 105. And then on bottom, I have 1 times 5, which is 5. So then I do 105 divided by 5, and I get that x equals 21. Maybe you're like, Miss Price, isn't there a shortcut that we can do? So if we have 15/1 times, and that should have been negative 21. If I have 15/1 times negative 7/5, we could do our cross multiply to reduce thing. So I know that 5 goes into 15 3 times. So I can reduce those. And so then 3 times negative 7 equals negative 21. So either way, you get the same answer. You choose your method. The answer is negative 21. Good job. Check it to make sure we're correct and tell me what you get. And our last example, we have 2 1/4 x equals 18. But wait, it's a mixed number. What do we need to do? So if it's a mixed number, what we're going to do is we're going to turn this into an improper fraction by doing that little around the world thing. So if you remember, we're going to do 4 times our whole number, and then we're going to add 1. So if I do 4 times 2, that equals 8. And then I add 1. So I have 4 times 2 equals 8, and then 8 plus 1 equals 9. So it becomes 9/4. Always, always, always keep your same denominator. So I can rewrite this as 9/4x equals 18. And now what do I need to do? Multiply by the reciprocal. So if I have 9/4, I switch that to 4/9. So I'm multiplying both sides by 4/9. That cancels out on this side. So I'm left with x equals. Now I have 18/1 times 4/9. So this is the same thing. We can do that little reduce thing because 9 goes into 18 twice and 9 goes into 9 once. So now I just made this a lot simpler. So now I have 2 times 4, which equals 8. 1 times 1, well, that equals 1. So x equals 8. If you're not sure how I just did that, you can keep it as 18/1 times 4/9. And 18 times 4 equals 72. And then 1 times 9 is 9, and 72 divided by 9 equals 8. So either way, you get the same answer. You get to choose which method you want to use because both get the same answer. And that is all for this video. You are doing great. I am proud of you. You are doing fantastic. I'm just going to give you a round of applause. Great job. Keep it up. Do not give up.